Please join me in the sermon reading. We're still here in Matthew 1, verses 6 and 7 this time. And we're moving into that second part of Israel's history. And it says, "And Jesse was the father of King David, and David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife." We already talked about that whole thing with Bathsheba, right? "And Solomon was the father of Rehoboam, the father of Abijah, and the father of Asa." And we're going to be talking about Asa a lot today as we look at this idea of this genealogy of Jesus. See, the genealogy, this is all about Jesus. All about Jesus, okay? That's the whole thing. I mean, the scripture, it's about Jesus, okay? And it's also about God as the Redeemer in the midst of this. God is the faithful one. He reaches to us. He enters into covenants with us. And this is also a very concise history of the Old Testament of Israel. And I'm sharing it this way because when you don't understand something, you don't want to read it or even look at it because you look through and you're, I don't even know what this is. But if you can get a basic understanding of how the whole Old Testament is put together, it's like, oh, I understand this better now. As I read it, I understand more and I can apply it deeper into my life. Now, there are three distinct divisions of the history that we have here in this genealogy. The first one is the patriarchs. We talked about this one. Basically, through centuries and generations, the children of Israel basically make a big circle. That's what happens. God goes to Abraham and says, here you go, the land of Canaan. This is your promise. This is your homeland. They have to go away to Egypt. Remember, there's a famine, and Joseph, we learned about that story. God raises up Moses and Aaron. He leads them out. They're kind of wandering in the wilderness because they're kind of unfaithful. They grumble a lot. And then God raises up Joshua, and Joshua brings them back to their homeland. I mean, that's centuries and centuries out of the Bible. A big circle. Now, as we move into this second period, this is called the Monarchy. This is a time where the land is settled again. Okay, and we're going to look at some of these kings that are going to be coming up, and it's going to be Saul, who was the first one, who's not even mentioned here, but then there's David, and then Solomon, and then it continues in this process. And when Solomon was still king in Israel, this was still one unified land, and it was one country, one nation, okay? But the time Solomon gets done and his son Rehoboam shows up, bad things are happening, and the nation literally gets split in half, and it's called the divided kingdom. So sometimes you hear God talking about Israel to the north, sometimes Judah to the south. That's where it gets all confusing in the midst of that, okay? So we've moved through that first part of Israel's history where God says, I'm the king. I'm the one. I'm the leader. I'm the provider. I will win your battles. I've entered into a covenant. Remember with Abraham, with Moses and the law, with David, he enters into these covenants with these people. And Israel's responsibility in the midst of the covenant is simply their obedience to God, to love God with all that they are, and to trust in and serve God alone. And last week we saw this whole turning point in Israel's life and history, remember? 1 Samuel 8, Israel rejects God as their king, and they say, we want a human king to rule over us. And this is a downhill progression, and the whole point of last week's message, hopefully you got a hold of that, is when we exchange God's perfect plan for our second-rate will and wishes and desires, things do not end well. Everybody remember that. God's will is the place you want to be. There's no better place to be than in the will of God. So here we start, and really it's about 1 Samuel 12. And Samuel's given kind of this farewell speech because he's been the leader, but now he's stepping aside because a king is coming in. He's still a spiritual leader. He's still like a priest and a prophet in the midst of this. And he says, I want you to remember what God's done for you. Man, you were in bondage in Egypt, and you cried out to God, and God said, yes, I will send people, and he raised in Moses, and he raised you up, and he brought you out, but your forefathers forgot God. And they started worshiping these false gods like these Asherah poles and Baals, okay? This will be a point in just a moment. We're going to talk about them. And then bad things started happening, and God delivered them into the hands of the Philistines and Moab, and they came in. So they cried out, and they said, we have sinned. We've not looked to you like we were supposed to. And the most amazing thing, he says, is God was right there. As soon as you turned, as soon as you repented, God was there, and God brought you back, and he redeemed you, and he made everything wonderful. Now here we are again. This army's coming, and you're afraid of this army, the Ammonites that are coming, and you say, oh no, we can't look to you, God. We have to find a human king to lead us into this battle. He says, you shouldn't be doing this. But even once again, if you would just obey, if you will just serve God, if you will just fear the Lord alone, God is going to bless you and do amazing, amazing things. Because this is the hope and the encouragement that he gives us. And remember, encouragement, man, I love this, is the fuel in which hope runs. That encouragement that he shares with us. And here's what Samuel tells him in chapter 12. He says, the Lord will not forsake his people for his great name's sake, and because it is pleased the Lord to make you his people, okay? Moreover, as for me, God forbid that I should sin against the Lord and not be in prayer for you. But I'm going to teach you what's good. I'm going to teach you what's right. Only fear the Lord and serve him alone. And if you do this, God says, I know in the past you've messed up, but man, I'm going to do great things for you. But if you don't, you start serving these other gods again. You start not looking to God and turning away from the Lord. Guess what's going to happen? Bad things are going to start happening again. Saul was made king. Saul has a lot of problems. We'll talk about him after a while a little bit. He doesn't listen to the Lord. He does some really stupid things, and God's grieved that he made Saul king. But here's the point we're going to look at today. This idea of looking to the Lord to win our battles, looking at the Lord and trusting in the Lord to give us the things we need, to show us the direction we're supposed to go, and all that we are, to look only to God in the midst of this. You see, God is all-powerful. God is all-knowing. God is the creator of everything. God is the life giver. God says, I'm at work in the lives and in this world. And I have a purpose, and I'm directing things. You know, we've seen this in a linear way to a conclusion. I am God alone, God says. Why would you look to other things? Why would you look to created things when you can look to the one who is creator and sustainer and the one who pours his grace and his love upon you, and it says, I am here to do everything that you need me to do. Why would you ever look away? And here's the idea. Out of Isaiah, I'm going to go past this one. Why would you look outside of God? Here's what God says, Isaiah 44. This is what the Lord says, Israel's King and Redeemer, Lord Almighty. I'm the first and the last. Apart from me, there is no God. Okay? There is no God in the midst of this. Now, all these scriptures, I think I put them in the bulletin so you can read through these. Isaiah 43, he says kind of the same thing. Isaiah 46, it's almost comical how God brings this about in Isaiah 44, verses 6 to 23, because he starts talking about these idols that they're turning to. And he says, so here we are, we're in the midst of this thing. He says, and your blacksmiths, they go out and they get some metal and they put it in the fire and they shape it and they make it look like a human or they make it look like something. And then they set it up and they go, oh, this is God. We should bow down and worship. He goes, are you really that dull to take some metal and think that's a God? Even better yet, he says, you go out and you cut down these trees and you take this wood and you cut a chunk out of it and you make this idol and you say, ooh, this is God, I should bow down and worship it. But with the rest of the wood from that tree, you start a fire and you cook and eat over it and you stay warm. He says, the same wood that you cook on, he says, you say is a God? He goes, are you really that dull? How would you do that? You've got to come into your senses and realize to serve me. But it's a constant theme in the scripture and even flows through today and even flows through the church today, I'm telling you. We're seeking and trusting things outside of God to meet our needs, to make things happen, to give us protection, to win our battles, and to help us. A constant theme through this time period as well that we're going to have to see. It's this idea of idolatry, of turning to false gods, especially the gods of Baal and Ashtoreth, okay? And here's a little just information for you, okay? Here's our information. Are you ready? Now, they had these things called Ashtoreth poles, okay? Ashtoreth was a Phoenician goddess of fertility, a goddess of agriculture and protection. Now she, in this worship of this false god Ashtoreth, okay, there was a very lewd rites that took place during this time of worship. There was prostitution and divination and all this weird stuff, and they did it through these carved trees, kind of like you see here. They carve out this tree and they go, oh, this is Ashtoreth. This is a goddess here to take care of us, okay? And so they worshiped. And God, if you hear in the scripture, if you're reading through the scriptures and all the prophets, God says, and there you did all these detestable things underneath all these spreading trees, is what he said. And you go, what does he mean by that? Right there is what he means by that. You see the trees, and they worshiped underneath of it. Now, there was a male cohort to this goddess. The name was Baal. This is actually a high place altar for Baal that they found, supposedly. And he was a fertility god whose name means Lord and Master. But they did the same detestable practices with him and those rites, with the lewdness and prostitution and divination and all this, except they even go farther with Baal. We find out they even offered child sacrifice. Can you imagine that? You think it's just in a movie? No, this is reality, folks, okay? In fact, we find out 2 Kings 17:17, God is speaking, and he says, I can't believe you people. He says, you go to this altar of Baal, and you're sacrificing your children in the fire to this false god. What is wrong with you? Even better yet, Jeremiah 19:5, God says, you're sacrificing your children. This couldn't even have come into my mind. Why would you even do something so stupid? And yet the children of Israel are sacrificing their children, thinking that this God is going to do something for them, because they're surrounded by this culture where this God is the big thing. And they just can't keep their focus on the one true God. But it's kind of like that a lot of times, I would say, even through the day. It's always been, if you sacrifice your children, things will be well for you. I don't know why the enemy picks that one out, but somehow it just keeps moving. So they look out and they go, oh, we need wisdom, we need help, we need protection, we need a good harvest, we need someone to win our battles, so we have to look to these false gods to win them for us. Now, I understand that today, we wouldn't be so foolish to look at things like Baal's or Ashtoreth poles for our wisdom or our direction or to win our battles, would we? We are well past that, much more cultured than that and sophisticated, right? So in our culture, we have things that we trust in and we look to win our battles and meet our needs and to help us and to bless us and give us direction and wisdom. And those kinds of things are our money, leaders, politics, self, popularity, the rules we try to hold together, sex, whatever it is, we found our own idols that we look to outside of God to meet our needs, haven't we? We're really not any better than anyone else until we can keep our focus on God and trust in God alone. Man, if you want to hear what God really thinks about this, Jeremiah chapter 3, God starts talking about these detestable things that the children of Israel and Judah are doing. He's so upset in the midst of it. He uses some pretty graphic language, especially you go to Ezekiel 23, he uses very graphic language. And you say, can he actually put that in the Bible? I don't know, that's kind of graphic. Well, God did, because he's so upset that the people who are supposed to be looking to him alone, he says, you're lusting after these gods like they're going to do something for you, but they are worthless idols. They can do nothing for you. And Israel takes off the northern kingdom, and they do this, and Assyria comes in and wipes them out. I thought maybe Judah would look up and go, ooh, that was bad. Maybe we should get away from it. No, they double down, and they just go right with it too. He says, I understand what you're doing. See, that's the culture that they're living in right now. They can't stay faithful to God. So we move forward. In the line of Jesus. Remember, this is the line of Jesus. This is God's a redeemer, okay? Because some of the kings in this line of Jesus, they are bad people. They do evil in the sight of God, and yet they're right there, part of Jesus' genealogy. It's very interesting. So we have David. See, Saul was first. God rejected him because he wouldn't listen. He puts David in there. David's a pretty good guy. He has a heart after God, except he messes up a handful of times. I mean, with the whole Uriah thing and Bathsheba and killing Uriah. That the whole thing is in there too. And so out of that, still through Bathsheba, he has Solomon. Solomon's supposed to be the wisest person in the world, right? All the wisdom, but you know what he does with all that wisdom? He doesn't use it because he oppresses and taxes the people so much. Yeah, he's rich. He makes alliances with all these kings all around everywhere, and he has all this money and stuff, but he literally splits the nation in half. So that by the time that Solomon has his son Rehoboam, they say, come to him, and when he comes into line, they say, please, you gotta lay off this taxes, this oppression. And he's like, well, let me think about it. He goes and talks for 3 days and gets counsel. And they say, yeah, you should lay up. He says, no, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to double down and make it worse. And he goes out to him. He says, you think my father was bad? You see, my little pinky is thicker than my father's waist. I'm telling you, I'm going to make it so bad for you. And immediately, boom, the nation split. And now Jeroboam is king in Israel, and they're just in the south. Rehoboam does some nasty things. He does what's evil in the sight of the Lord. He allows all kinds of Asherah poles to be put up. They're worshiping Baal, all that kind of stuff. He dies. He has a son named Abijah. Abijah says he even does more evil things. Not doing good stuff in the midst of this. But to Abijah, God makes this promise in 1 Kings 15. He says, all this evil stuff is going on, and yet, because of the promise I made to David, this covenant I made, I'm going to raise somebody up who's going to lead my nation. And you know who that happens to be? His son, Asa. So here we are, folks. 2 Chronicles 14 through 16. King Asa comes onto the scene. You know what it says about King Asa? He did what was good and what was right in the eyes of the Lord. He removed the altars and the high places, and he cut down the Asherah poles. He called for Judah to seek the Lord and obey God's laws and his commands, and the kingdom was at peace and it was blessed. Wow. He had a heart after God and said, I'm going to follow you, God, and I'm going to have everybody else follow you too, and alone we're going to look to you. Great things started happening. So much so that right at this time, the Cushite army, which is down from like northern Africa, is coming up, and they're going to attack. Their army is much larger than what they have there in Judah. I'm telling you, this prayer you're going to see right here, this should be the prayer that you should have memorized. This is a thing you should have typed up and printed out all over your house so you can see this, you can read it, so you can remember this, okay? Here's what Asa says in the midst of this. Then Asa called to the Lord his God and said, Lord, there is no one like you. God, there is no one like you. You are everything. Awesome. And you like to help the powerless against the mighty. So help us, Lord our God, for we rely upon you and you alone. And in your name we have come against this vast army. In your name, the name of the great I am, Yahweh, we come against this army. You know, the great I am, that name literally means I cause, I make happen, I do things, and everybody knows who I am because I am the one with power to make this happen. In your great name we come against this army. And guess what happens? They waylay this army because God's power goes with them, and they send them back to northern Africa. God's right there, says yes, and he delivers them. Some amazing things start happening. You see, when you look to God alone, when you trust in God alone, when you seek God with all of your heart, God fights our battles, God wins our battles. When we are obedient to God and according to God's will, we do the things God asks us to do. God blesses it and is at work with power. If we could remember that. I mean, how often do we think that we have to turn to other things, to trust in other things, to get help from other things instead of just bringing it to God? I don't know what battles you're facing in your life right now. They might be physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, health-wise, relation-wise, whatever that battle is. If we could just come just like Asa and say, God, there is no one like you. No one. You stand up for the powerless. You help us, Lord. And we come and we rely completely and only upon you to make this thing happen. The battle belongs to the Lord. That whole idea comes out of really David. Remember, David, before he was king, went and fought this giant named Goliath who had been mocking the children of Israel. He'd been mocking God's people, mocking God himself. And he comes in there and he says, I know you come at me with sword and javelin and spear, but I'm coming against you in the name of the Lord Almighty. That's who I come against you with. And he gets to this point and he says, and just to let you know, so everybody's going to know this, the Lord saves not with the sword or the spear, for the battle is the Lord's. The battle belongs to the Lord, and he will give you into my hands. And we know what happened. Thunk, thunk, the giant goes down, and boom, they take over, and the Philistines have to run away instead of mocking God. Where are you trying to fight yourself? Where are you looking to some other kind of thing to fight this battle that God says, just turn to me, and I will make it happen? If you're faithful, if you trust in God, he will give you direction. He will give you power. He will give you victory. Now notice, they still had to fight. They still had to do the things they were supposed to do, but God accomplished it. See, here's the second half of this. See, Asa has this thing called the reform or revival in the land. In fact, what he does is he has the entire nation enter into a covenant with God to seek God wholeheartedly. He removes the idols. He cuts down the Asherah poles, and he repairs the very altar of God, and they go and they worship God. See, for a long time, they'd been letting this relationship with God wane. God had taken second place, if not third, fourth, fifth, and even beyond that, all the way through. And they were messing things up. And it was time to make a covenant again with God, to seek God wholeheartedly and to worship God alone. Wholehearted seeking of God, which means you're not looking other places. You're saying, God, it's about you, and we're going to focus on you and you alone and worship you alone. This is so powerful. This revival begins to take such root that people from the north hear about it. This is a whole different nation. Remember, they're not the same nation. They're fighting each other. They're coming down to live in the south, because they saw that the Lord was with him and that God was at work and lives were being transformed, and they wanted to be a part of it. Can I just say this? When we go through revival, when we seek God wholeheartedly in everything that we do, and people begin to see that God is with us and we're winning battles because God is winning them for us, people want to be a part of that, and they will come to be a part of that. See, revival is really about repenting of your wrong ways, letting God fall out of that number one importance in your lives. But as soon as we take that point where we ask forgiveness, we say, God, I'm going to change. I'm going to look back to you. That's the point where God forgives. That's the point where God redeems. And that's the point where God says, yes, let us move forward now. Here we go. And he will let us do that. When we trust, when we're obedient, when we worship with all our hearts. See, this was so powerful for King Asa that his grandmother, his grandmother was the queen mother. He deposed her, kicked her right out of the palace. You know why? Because she decided she was going to put up an Asherah pole. And he said, this isn't going to happen here. I don't care if you are grandma. You're out. And he took down that pole, and he cut it down, and he threw it in the valley, and he burned it. He says, this stuff is not going to happen anymore. Wholeheartedly, we are going to seek God. He was serious with it. You see, recommitment to God is something that has to happen often. Just like staying clean is a recommitment to staying clean is like why we bathe daily, or at least every other day, whatever it is, because you have to continually do that. It's the same thing with God. But here's the scary part. Later in life, the 36th year, Israel, Judah, different nations. Israel's confronting Judah. They're coming down in a warlike manner. And Asa takes the temple treasury. Now, this is a temple. This is money for God. Takes the temple treasury, and he runs off, and he makes a treaty with the king of Aram. And he says, oh, Israel's coming against us. We need you to come protect us. You hear what he's saying? He doesn't trust God anymore, but now he's trusting other things to come take care of him. He's looking outside of God. He's not wholeheartedly seeking God. And the prophet Hananiah comes and he confronts him. In chapter 16, verses 7 to 10, it says, "What are you doing? Don't you remember when the Cushites came up from the south? You cried out to God with this amazing prayer and said, 'We rely upon you. It's only you.' And God just went through and won that battle for you. Now the end of your life and Israel comes and you don't turn to God, but you have to try and find it from somewhere else." And the idea is, be careful, folks, how simple and easy this creeps into our lives from our culture, where we go, "Yeah, okay, God, that's pretty good, but I really need money to help me. If we're really going to do this, we need a bunch of money. We need possessions. We need this or that. Lord, we really need this thing to take place for us. This is what we have to look to make this thing happen." When the reality is, turn to God to win your battles. What are you looking for and trusting in and seeking outside of God to win these battles? You understand, God is so good. God is so faithful, so forgiving, always ready to move as we seek him wholeheartedly. So I guess today, what I'm asking of us to do, could we make a covenant with the Lord to wholeheartedly seek God and to revive our spirits and to remember again that God will win the battles? Turn our eyes away from all these other things, these idols, these false things we think are going to take care of us, but really are not, and move forward.